I'm Beth Lyons. I'm the Executive Director with the New Brunswick Women's Council. A variety of things. There's so many different factors that stop, prevent, or discourage women from entering politics, and a lot of them actually intersect and interact with each other, so it's this whole force that's often keeping women out of politics. I like to really pay attention to the structural things that are keeping women out of politics. For instance, the fact that we have a first-past-the-post system where it's winner-take-all in elections instead of something like proportional representation, where we consistently see a lot more women being elected. There's also things like just personal bias and discrimination and outmoded ideas about gender roles, that women just aren't built for politics, and that's kind of naturally a man's arena. So we sometimes see prejudice, stereotypes, bias coming into play as well. And then we also have the way that the genders are socialized and the ongoing division of labor. We know that it's hard for women to be involved in politics when they have small children at home, for instance. It's not impossible, certainly, but the way that our political system is built is it's an incredible amount of time away from home. We don't have universal childcare in New Brunswick, so it can be more challenging for a woman who's more likely in a heterosexual partnership to be the one who's really taking on the unpaid labor of childcare to find time to be involved in politics. What we have in New Brunswick and throughout Canada is called first past the post, which is really that if you have a multiplicity of candidates, the person who gets the highest number of votes ends up taking the riding, instead of looking at proportional representation, where you look at how many votes each party got and distributing the seats more equitably based on who got what proportion of the vote. And what ends up happening with that, because it's winner take all, is that parties, because they know that it's that one candidate who gets in, there's no chance of that vote, the votes that they got, showing up or being distributed in other places like you would see in proportional representation. They're going to default to the candidate that they feel really has the best chance of winning in that system. And that often means that they're going to the Old Boys Network, or the Old Boys Network, the Old Boys Club is picking the folks that they're going to support in the ridings. And so that's where we really see the barriers for women, is at the riding level. And a lot of that has to do with that first past the post system that we have. We think that that would really change if we had a mixed member proportional representation system. Whenever, like, if you were to look at a chart of legislatures, parliaments, assemblies across the world, the ones that have the highest proportion of women are consistently ones that use some form of proportional representation. So there's lots of things that we can do, both on a personal level and also on a structural level. And I think it's really important that we have both of those things in the mix to address this issue. On the personal level, we can just check the assumptions that we have around women and politics. Are we assuming that women are naturally less fit to be in politics than men? Are we making assumptions that are different about a woman who has young children at home versus a man who has young children at home and wants to run for office? There are a lot of stereotypes and assumptions and biases that we have, that we've been socialized to have, that it's really useful to just step back and see, are those at play for you, and challenge them for yourself. And it's not just when it comes to women in politics, it's also, you know, women out in other professions and in other trades, looking at the assumptions we're making about, you know, the roles that men and women are suited for. And then also even just looking at our interpersonal relationships, our interactions, and seeing if we're expecting different things from men and women, and if that goes back to the way that we've been socialized, and if those expectations are actually unfair and potentially even harmful. Can be really great for just your own personal life, for those around you, as well as for this more big societal change, to examine any biases that you might have, which we all do because we've all grown up in this world and been socialized a certain way. On a more structural level, it's actually, I think, a really exciting time to be in New Brunswick right now, because we've seen the government introduce this idea of gender-based incentives for parties. So really exciting time to be in New Brunswick, because we're going to see if providing financial incentives to parties actually helps boost the number of women that are running in politics. So not all jurisdictions, but some, including New Brunswick, basically have a pot of money that after an election gets divvied up amongst the political parties based on how many votes they got. And there are considerations like they have to have gotten off over a certain percentage of a vote for that to count towards them getting money. So what the government has done is they've introduced legislation that would change the formula that divvies up that money. So the pot of money stays the same. There's no more taxpayer dollars that are going into the pot. Pot stays the same. It's how it's divvied up that's going to change. And basically what it'll be is that votes that were cast for women candidates will be weighted 1.5 times more than those cast for men. So very important that we're clear that this isn't about the actual election itself. It's not that votes for women count for more. It's about the way the money is divided up after. So basically, in terms of money for parties, votes for women are worth more. And so it's interesting in a couple of ways, because we hope anyway, that it's going to encourage parties not only to run more women, but to run them more competitively. We've certainly seen instances where parties, to boost the number of women they're running, will parachute a woman into a riding that has not been competitive for that party in years, or they put her into the riding, or she's of the riding herself, and there's no real support from the party. So they get to say, we're running, more women candidates, but they haven't really backed them up, and they were never really competitive. With this solution, because it's based on the number of votes cast, parties aren't going to get that much of a bonus for just running women. They really want to run women and run them competitively. They want those women to get as many votes as possible so that they're going to get a bigger piece of that pot of money. Like, none of this is about women wanting an unfair advantage. It's about evening that playing field so that women can actually get their names out there, nominating conventions, and potentially win them, and then go on to compete or to run to be elected to the Legislative Assembly. They just want a fair shake at it, and we want to recognize that there's nothing inherent to women that makes them less likely to be in politics or to make them less likely to be good in politics. It's really that there's a number of stereotypes, of biases, and then also these structural elements that are making it really difficult for women to enter politics. Right. So on one hand, it's just the right thing to do, that we have these legislative assemblies, we have parliaments that are meant to represent the people. We elect people there to represent us, and they should reflect the population that they're representing. It's unbelievable to me that we have a society that's 50% women, and yet we've never broken, I think it's 20%. I don't think New Brunswick is actually particularly close to 20% even, that are in our legislative assembly. That's just unbelievable to me. So it's a matter of representation. If politics is about representation, then everyone should be represented, and represented at a critical mass. There's also the fact that we hope that when we add women, we actually change politics. That when we have women, that there's going to be more gender-based analysis, that there's going to be more intersectional, anti-oppressive feminist thought, that there's going to be more consideration basically to women and women's needs and women's priorities and women's ideas at decision-making tables. That's fundamentally what this is all about. So it's really important that we also acknowledge that when we're talking about women, women are not a homogenous group, and we need to name that there are particular groups of women that are even less likely to be seen in elected politics than others. For instance, Indigenous women, racialized women, women who are immigrants to New Brunswick, for instance. And a lot of times we talk about diversity in politics and it ends up being about men and women. If we're going to invoke the word diversity, which I think is great, we really need to talk about it in a fulsome way. That includes gender diversity, which is not necessarily just about men and women. It's also about trans, non-binary folk. It means talking about having a legislative assembly that isn't entirely white. It means having more folks with disabilities. It means folks with different backgrounds and different lived experiences as well.